Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rebecca Friedman, the founding director of the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University. And I'm so proud to welcome you to season 5, first episode, thus a few glitches, of our Coffee and Conversations with the Miami Book Fair. Today is episode 1, so welcome back, everyone, and we are back. This series of Coffee and Conversations began at this point about a year and a half ago in the middle of the pandemic when pivot was everybody's favorite word. We started Coffee and Conversations as a way of strengthening community ties and supporting the great work being done at our many community partners. We've explored topics from how the pandemic has affected museums and cultural institutions, histories of anti-Blackness and museum spaces and beyond. And we've chatted with our many community partners. So please visit our YouTube channel and watch the past episodes. Now with this season, we are again working with the Miami Book Fair by highlighting a number of book fair authors to promote and provide a kind of teaser for the fair itself. Today we talk with the wonderful Randall Kennedy, author of Say It Loud on Race, Law, History, and Culture. And he will be in conversation with our very own Melba Pearson. Briefly, our format's simple and lasts about 30 minutes. And at the end, we'll take some questions from the audience. So at any time, just submit a question at the Q&A button. So without any further ado, allow me to quickly introduce our wonderful guest today. Like I said, we have the amazing Melba Pearson with us, my friend and colleague, to chat with our author. Melba is an attorney specializing in civil rights and criminal law with an emphasis on policy. She's the Director of Policy and Programs for Florida International University's Center for the Administration of Justice, as well as Senior Fellow Faculty in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Her work centers on the expansion of the use of prosecutorial performance indicators for more transparency, equity, and racial justice in the criminal justice system. Before joining FIU, Ms. Pearson spent 3 years as Deputy Director of the ACLU Florida, where she worked to change police practices, expand voting rights, and reform the criminal justice system. Previously, Ms. Pearson was an Assistant State Attorney in Miami-Dade County for 16 years, culminating as Assistant Chief in the Career Criminal Robbery Unit, supervising junior attorneys while prosecuting homicides. In 2020, she was the incredible progressive candidate for Miami-Dade State Attorney. We were all cheering for her, receiving close to 155,000 votes across party lines. She lives in Miami Beach with her husband, Bill, and we're blessed to have her as a colleague. She will be talking today with Randall Kennedy. Randall Kennedy is Michael R. Klein Professor at Harvard Law School, where he teaches courses on contracts, criminal law, and the regulation of race relations. He attended St. Albans School, Princeton University, Oxford University, and Yale Law School. He served as a law clerk for Judge J. Skelly Wright of the United States Court of Appeals and for Justice Thurgood Marshall of the United States Supreme Court. He is member of the Bar of the District of Columbia and the Supreme Court of the United States. His latest book, the one that we're discussing today, Say It Loud on Race, Law, History, and Culture, was awarded the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award. Mr. Kennedy is a very prolific author and writes for a wide range of scholarly and general interest publications, including 6 books. And he's also published several collections of shorter works. His articles can be found in the American Prospect, The Nation, The Atlantic Monthly, Georgetown Law Review, Harvard Black Letter Journal, and the Boston Globe. A member of the American Law Institute, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Philosophical Association, Mr. Kennedy is also a trustee emeritus of Princeton University. And that was just the beginning. So welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being here. I don't want to waste any more time, so you guys take it from here. Melba, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be in this discussion with you, Professor Kennedy. After reading your book, I literally have like 1,000 questions and only 24 minutes. So let's see what we can talk about and kind of dive into. Professor Kennedy, in your book, you quote Alexis de Tocqueville, where he states that slavery recedes, but the prejudice to which it has given birth is immovable. How do recent events play into his prediction? And, basically the research that you did in putting together this amazing book, how does that all center around this quote?
Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be talking with you. And I'd certainly like to thank our hosts for making this forum available to us. Now, you quoted Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his great book, Democracy in America, presented a thoroughly pessimistic view of race in American life. He had a chapter called The Three Races of America: whites, Native Americans, blacks. And de Tocqueville thought that there would never be racial equality in the United States. He thought it was much more likely that there would be wars of extermination. He had a very dark view. And basically, he thought with respect to blacks and whites that the real poison in the well was the confluence of enslavement and a difference in complexion. De Tocqueville thought, well, even after slavery is abolished, everyone will know who were the people who were enslaved. And so he had a thoroughly pessimistic view. And what you've got to say is that on the one hand, there's been change in American life that de Tocqueville would not have imagined. I mean, de Tocqueville would not have imagined a black president of the United States. He would not have imagined a black vice president of the United States. He would not have imagined a black person being the head of the Department of Defense, which is, of course, the way it is right now. On the other hand, de Tocqueville would have said, "I told you so," with respect to some of what we're seeing. I mean, after the first Reconstruction, after the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, after the Civil Rights Act of 1957, 1960, 1964, 1968, after all of the demonstrations, after all of the petitions, after all of the prayers, after all of the great orations, I have a dream. After all of that, we still live in a country that is clearly scarred by our racial, by racism, and very intense, very deep-seated, very widespread racism in every aspect of American life. Now, I know that, you were very involved in the administration of criminal justice. That's very public, as is voting rights, very public. And obviously there is, the race line is there. But if you go to other areas, friendship, dating, marriage, private areas, the race line is there too. So, we've seen a tremendous amount of change in America, and I take solace from that. I really do. Unfortunately, however, there are some continuities that are deeply troubling.
Yeah, and that definitely brings me to, you touched on that pessimism, brings me to another point in your book where you talk about how, Black folks tend to fall into two categories, either optimistic, we can all be Americans someday, we just got to, keep pushing and keep pressing. And then the pessimistic view, which is reflected in Alexis de Tocqueville's thoughts that basically we'll never be included, we'll never be equal partners, equal citizens in this democracy. And at the time that you wrote your book, you characterized yourself as an optimist, even though you were raised by a pessimist. So sort of like, you were talking also about the optimism you experienced under previous presidential administrations, but the last presidential administration really shook that optimism. So what is your thought process now? Do you still consider yourself to be an optimist? And, what can we hold on to or look to as ways to remain hopeful? if we are optimists, right? Because if you're a pessimist, there's not a whole lot there's not a lot of places to go, right? But if you're an optimist, how do you hold on to that optimism?
I am still an optimist. I'm a chastened optimist, however. I am a more cautious optimist. I am, frankly, a deeply saddened optimist because for most of my life, I've been thoroughly in the optimistic camp, even though, as you noted in your remarks, my father, whom I revere, great man, smart man, my father was a thoroughgoing pessimist. My father was really in the Black nationalist tradition, which is a very distinguished tradition. There are white people who have taken that view. You mentioned de Tocqueville. You know, I tell you some other people who were white who were pessimists. Thomas Jefferson, thoroughgoing pessimist. Abraham Lincoln, thoroughgoing pessimist. And in the Black nationalist tradition, you had people like, well, Malcolm X would be one, and there have been others. My former colleague Derek Bell in the 20th century, very important pessimists. These are smart people. You know, it didn't just come out of nowhere. They were taking a look at American life and they were saying, listen, no need being sentimental. After what I've seen, in their view, they did not think that we would be able to overcome. And I say we, the nation, would be able to overcome. I view myself as an optimist. I embrace the great John Hope Franklin's book, From Slavery to Freedom. I take a look at my own life. I mean, I was born in 1954 in Columbia, South Carolina. You know, when I was born in South Carolina, segregation ruled. Segregation ruled. Just a few years before I was born, Black people could not even participate in the South Carolina Democratic Party primary. The same primary that propelled Joe Biden to the White House not so long ago. Just a few years before I was born, Black people couldn't even participate in that. So I've seen change, and I think that change is possible in America. I think that more change is possible with intelligent, persistent, collective endeavor. Yeah, I think that we can move our country up a bit higher. And so I'm still an optimist, though I got to say I'm chastened. I don't chastise the pessimists as much as I used to. I really did. I used to really go after the pessimists and really, be taunting would be too strong, but I used to be very tough. Now I've had to back back. I've had to back back, and I disagree. I'm an optimist, but the great tragedy of it all is that the pessimists do have a point. You can't say to my father, well, where'd you just dream this up from? You can't laugh at him. He had a point. And it's really too bad that our history, and even more to the point, it's really too bad that our present gives a point to the pessimists.
And interestingly, too, your father served in the U.S. military, so he, fought for this country, and he, held a number of positions and really, tried to build up and improve his community. So again, this pessimism isn't sort of coming out of a vacuum or sort of like, this kind of hands-off approach. He was hands-on in fighting for this country and trying to shape this country through local means. So
absolutely. Oh, there are millions, and his story is not idiosyncratic. I mean, my parents were regular, working class, church going, regular Southern folk who were refugees from the Jim Crow South, and so they joined millions, and their sensibility is the sensibility of millions. I think that they were strivers, and they put a lot. They were hardworking, goal-oriented, education-loving people, and they had faith. They hoped that things would be better. And my mother was an optimist, but my father was not. They were great parents, but they were not, their view and their conflicted view, just like my conflicted view, is held by many millions of Black Americans.
And interestingly enough, like just tying it to some other things that are happening today, you're hearing this resurgence of, people desiring to leave the country, talking people of color. So for instance, Jill Scott, the singer, recently said in an interview that she's considering leaving the United States in order to protect her Black son. And that sort of mirrors that American colonization society movement in the 1800s, as well as sort of that back to Africa, Marcus Garvey movement, right? So, what are your thoughts, or what are the takeaways from sort of this history rhyming, where in the 1800s and early 1900s, there was this movement to leave the country, whether it's by, pushing Black Americans out, saying, go back to quote unquote where you came from, or people choosing to move because they feel that they can't get equality in this country. What are your thoughts with the resurgence of these discussions happening now?
Yeah, there's always been, some degree of out-migration. It's interesting. One might say, why hasn't there been more, given what Black people have faced in the United States? I mean, after all, look at the world. Millions of people move. There's great waves of migration. There has not been great waves of migration of Black Americans from the United States. I will say this, migration is not the only way, however, of distancing yourself from a society. Another way of distancing yourself from a society is, in a sense, internal migration. And in fact, in Black American history, I think that is the more prevalent mode. That is to say, people saying, I'm going to stay here, okay? I'm going to stay in my neighborhood. I'm going to stay in my church. I'm going to stay with my people in my sororities, my fraternities, my internal community. We will be a nation within a nation. Now, that, I think, shows itself quite a lot in American life. And again, there's this, well, Du Bois talked about it, the two-ness and the double-sidedness of African-American feeling, African-American sensibility. It is there. Again, I think African-American history is so interesting because on the one hand, it's absolutely extraordinary what Black Americans have been able to accomplish. I mean, 1865 is not that long ago. In 1865, you had, with the passage of the 13th Amendment, the freeing of 4 million people who had been chattel, who had been human property. It had been against the law to teach these people literacy. That was a felony not that long ago. And so, what Black Americans have been able to do is really quite extraordinary. At the same time, is also true that even at this late date, what are we confronting? We're confronting efforts to keep Black people from voting. We're confronting, racial discrimination of the rankest sort in the administration of criminal justice at every level. I know that you're particularly interested in prosecutors there. If we're talking about judges, there. If we're talking about juries, there. If we're talking about the police, there. I mean, it's again, there's change. It's better, but racism is still all too prevalent, and that's what we're wrestling with.
So you had mentioned your colleague, Professor Derek Bell at Harvard Law, and how he kind of committed the cardinal sin of criticizing the movement in public, right? Talking about, the issues within the ways that people are trying to attain equality and justice in this country, right? So is there room for these types of discussions, in the public sphere, or is that like talking out of school and it should only be, held in a more insulated or isolated way? In other words, that everyone doesn't have access to these types of discussions. What are your thoughts on that?
One of my favorite essays in the book is my essay on Derek Bell. Derek Bell and Me. It's an essay about his thinking. That's really the primary thing I wanted to do, was to describe and assess his thinking, his career as an academic. And it's also about my relationship with him, which was a very complex relationship because we did disagree. He was a thoroughgoing pessimist. And while he was alive, it was probably the time when I was probably the most optimistic. And we really went at it. And we went at it in public and print. And my view is that I think that people should be open. Black Americans have different thoughts, and that's not a bad thing. Nobody's going to have the corner on the truth. I think that people should express themselves civilly, respectfully, with discipline, but people should express themselves. A disagreement is okay. It's not a bad thing to disagree. In fact, it's not even a bad thing to disagree sharply. So no, I'm against this idea of, behind closed doors. Especially in the world of the internet, there is no closed door. Everything is open. It's open. So let's be open. Let's be straightforward. Let's explain ourselves. And by the way, let's also be willing to change our minds and confess error. It's no disgrace to be in error. You say something, you try the best you can. On Monday, you say something based on the knowledge that you have. On Friday, maybe with the intervening period, maybe you've learned something, maybe you've had more conversations, maybe somebody has, convinced you otherwise. And on Friday, you say, I said this on Monday, but you know what? I've thought about it a little bit more and I don't believe that anymore. Or I'd like to revise what I said on Monday. Now I have a somewhat different view. There's no disgrace in that. And our thinking is not going to evolve as it should without debate, without contention. So I'm all for openness.
And we also have an audience question that I'll pose to you at this point. And this is from Gus. Hey, Gus. While I'm not directly impacted, and so it's quote unquote easy for me to say, can you speak to the arc of history where, if looking where we started and see where we are now, has there not been overall improvement? And so while undoubtedly a step back now, can you speak as to that this may be a step back now, but that we can step forward again in the future, that it's not a permanent type situation?
Yeah, I like the formulation of our audience member, and I think there's a lot of strength to that. I mean, Black American history, we've taken tremendous steps forward and been thrown back. I mean, the first Reconstruction, First Reconstruction, I mean, just a few years after the abolition of slavery, you had Black men in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Tremendous step forward, and then a tremendous step backwards. I mean, Jim Crow pigmentocracy lasted from, the late 19th century until the middle of the 20th century. It's sobering to even think about that. But, could that be what's going on now? Frankly, I think some of it is absolutely yes. I think that the sight of a Black family occupying the White House, I think it absolutely deranged several millions of Americans. And, and it's understandable in a way, growing up as they did. I mean, if you had been taught to believe that, this is a white man's country, of course, white people are going to be on top. And then a Black family occupies the White House. You must think, oh my gosh, this is totally topsy-turvy. Something must be wrong. Well, clearly there were millions who believed that. And we frankly are still in the grip, and will probably for a while be in the grip of the reaction to that Black family occupying the White House and all that it represented. Having said that, we still see movement forward in various ways, and I think we have to be attentive to that. There is a strong racist tradition in America, but you know what? There's also a strong anti-racist tradition in America, and it would be unrealistic not to pay heed to the anti-racist tradition in America, just as we need to pay heed to the racist tradition.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm looking at the time, and I literally had like so many more questions because there were so many, interesting aspects to your book. So, first of all, I just want to thank you for creating this masterpiece and really just putting such a fine point to a lot of the experiences that we've had and really weaving it through history, because the reality is, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, but also you don't necessarily, like you so eloquently said before, we have to look at not only the racist tradition, but the anti-racist tradition, and the fact that it was, good people, strong people, average people from around the country that stood up to these, racist structures and establishments and tore them down. Mm-hmm. So we did it once, we can do it again. I will hope it's the takeaway. But any last words, Professor Kennedy, besides, telling everyone that they need to buy this book today if they haven't done so already?
My last word is a word of thanks. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you, and I wish you the best. Keep on pushing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Kennedy. And again, thank you to the amazing team at Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab for putting this together and for allowing me to have the space to be able to interact with Professor Kennedy and be exposed to his amazing work. So thank you guys, and back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you both so much, Professor Kennedy. I look forward to hearing you at the Miami Book Fair, where I understand you will be in a very short while. So thank you for joining us, Melba, as always. It's more than a pleasure to talk with you and to listen to you. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the audience. And just a little plug for Miami Book Fair here. It is the 38th Miami Book Fair, November the 14th to the 21st at the MDC Wolfson campus, downtown Miami. Just go to miamibookfair.com and you'll get all the information. So thank you, and please join us not next week, join us Thursday, as a matter of fact, when our very own WPHL program manager, Enrique Russell, will interview Albert Samaha, author of Concepcion and Immigrant Families' Fortunes, another wonderful book that we're privileged to discuss. So thank you, Professor Kennedy. Thank you, Melba. Both of you be well, and thanks, audience.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Okay, bye-bye.